everyone, and welcome to the Metropolitan Planning Council. My name is Danielle Gallet, and I'm a manager here. I help oversee our water programs here, and we're delighted to have you here. We have a packed room, and we also have a packed agenda, so we do want to go ahead and get started. Water supply is a foundational element of livable communities. And protecting our citizens, both in keeping them safe as well as ensuring affordable drinking water, are critically important, which is probably why we have a packed room, right? Before we get underway in hearing from our experts, I would like to first say a couple of thank yous. First, we have a great group of speakers with us here today. Thank you for taking the time to come and share your expertise with us. Next, I'd also like to thank CAN TV. They have been a wonderful partner with the Metropolitan Planning Council in making sure that these types of programs are available to everyone, and we're happy to say that today is live streaming. So thank you for those that are joining us via the live stream. I'd like anyone that is an elected official to please raise their hand, elected or appointed. Can we have a round of applause for folks? Thank you for serving your civic duty and rising above and coming to be able to join us today. We really appreciate it. I would also now like to ask those of you that work for and manage a water utility or work in the water industry to please raise your hand. Yeah, take a look around. Can you also join me in a round of applause for these folks? You are the ones on the front lines, making sure that we have safe and sustainable drinking water. Just like police and fire in our communities, you are on the line 24/7, making sure that what comes out of that tap is safe for us. And we're here to talk about how to make sure we even improve that more. So thank you for your service. Thanks for what you do for us. Finally, I would like to give a heartfelt thanks to Christopher Burke Engineering for its generous sponsorship of today's event. Thank you. Chris Burke has been a longtime loyal board member of the Metropolitan Planning Council. He has been a leader in water. He is also a faculty member at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and I'd like to welcome him here to say a few opening words. Chris, thank you for your generosity in sponsoring today.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you for putting this forum together. I think this forum is essential. Obviously, we're looking at a major regional problem, and several of the board members have encouraged us to take, meaning MPC, to take a really bold step in evaluating this, and I applaud their efforts, especially the great work that Danielle and Josh have been doing. Today is a starting point, and really is a starting point, which is bound to be a long process that's going to involve elected officials, and I'm glad some of them are here today, and most importantly, the users of our public water supply systems, the residents. I don't know where this is going to lead, but I do know that I'm quite certain the efforts that we're starting today and have been underway by others will definitely be sidelined if we all rely on wishful thinking. I often use UWT, the University of Wishful Thinking, and I think too often people that don't know math especially hope that this problem will be going away. Secondly, if we start looking at blame or shame to others, that this is bound to cause civil discourse, and if we don't have a clear and concise way of informing the public of the problem, the solution, and the timing of those solutions. And finally, we can all pursue non-productive bifurcations. As an example of everybody in this group gets into their own little area and starts pointing fingers. I think that's very unproductive. I really want to know what Josh's son is going to suggest that he should have done 20 years from now. So when we start being asked, what did you do and what did you not do back then? So I'm hoping that the speakers today are going to provide great insight on that. It's my pleasure this time to introduce State Senator Heather Staines. Senator Staines is with us today. She's represented the 7th District since 2008. She has many achievements. She's been a key champion for lead in the drinking water infrastructure issue. She introduced and saw legislation that was passed in 2017 that, among other things, ensures our schools and daycare facilities are tested for lead. It's my pleasure to introduce Senator Staines for some brief introductory remarks. Welcome, Senator.
And I will be very brief indeed. And I really, too, just want to add my thanks. I was thrilled that MPC was getting involved in this issue and doing this forum. It is well past time that we get the lead out. And the great panelist literally was wanting to set up times, I know, to meet with Chris Meister, for example, and learn about different financing techniques. And here I get to just do it right now. Really going to be terrific. I appreciate it. And thank you very much for your firm to be sponsoring this. We all probably in this room know there's no safe level of lead. You know, all the problems it does to brain development, nervous system development, what it does to hearing, speech, learning. There's just no safe level. As mentioned, I did pass a bill, for example, to at least test the lead in water of schools and daycare centers. And what we found, for example, in just suburban Cook, 78% of schools tested had at least one water fixture used by students that had high levels of lead in it. 78%. We know this is a huge issue. I introduced legislation this last session working, I think Colleen Smith from the Illinois Environmental Council is here. Are you back there? Working with her and her leader, Jen Walling, and a lot of stakeholders on around trying to now require doing an assessment of the water infrastructure and setting a timeline to replace all the lead service lines. Now, we haven't gotten to an agreement on that bill, and I can tell you now, I'm not trying to do anything in veto session. It's going to take a lot longer to try to get to an agreement, but I'm very much looking forward to working with everyone in the room to do it. But by just way of example, I mean, this is not a problem. We can't bury our heads. This is not a problem that's going to go away. I know the Tribune had done an analysis looking at City of Chicago data to estimate that 70% of homes tested in Chicago that have some level of lead in them, 1/3 of them at a higher level than what's allowed in bottled water. City estimates that there's 360,000 lead service lines, most of any city in the country by far. Very expensive to change all these out. We know it's a big problem. We know we need to work together because we certainly don't want to create hysteria. We know there's lots of cost implication, particularly for low-income families. A lot of challenges we're working on, but we can't bury our heads and pretend it's going to go away. We have very high levels of children with lead poisoning in Illinois, way above the national averages, again, as we probably all know. So it's a real problem that we actually need to address, and I really do appreciate the fact that you're having this forum looking at it and look forward to working with everybody on the right ways of coming up with some solutions. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. So I want to remind folks that if you are in the Twitter sphere or social media, to go ahead and start logging in to make sure that this conversation is happening out there as well. I want to make sure to remind folks that you can participate in that. That'd be great. So while the federal Congress finally banned the use of lead to convey water in 1986, it did not require remediation of this toxic material. Because of this, lead will continue to remain a public health concern so long as this legacy material remains. It is time to get the lead out of our drinking water infrastructure. We believe the following are necessary in order to move forward on this important and complicated issue, and I want to make sure I say it exactly how it's important. First, recognize that our municipalities, water providers, and property owners all have a responsibility and duty to work together in addressing this issue. Second, we need to inventory and map where and just how many lead service lines exist and prioritize remediation, beginning with those at greatest risk. Third, it is important to understand that replacement of all lead service lines does not guarantee the risk of lead exposure is removed. Buildings might still have old fixtures or solder that contains lead, which is why improved education and programming for homeowners and renters will be necessary. Fourth, in order to tackle this issue, we need to think creatively and take advantage of multiple funding streams and programs to finance remediation. This includes streamlining municipal permitting costs, timelines, and processes. Finally, it is imperative to improve equitable assistance to lower-income households. These are the folks oftentimes faced with the greatest risk of lead exposure. So programs must be designed to deliver more resources to low-income households and disadvantaged communities. Likewise, comprehensive solutions that address affordable housing and rental properties, as well as non-residential buildings such as schools and parks, will be critical. For our part, the Metropolitan Planning Council and its partners have been working behind the scenes to address policy and infrastructure issues related to lead in drinking water. And we will continue to bring these productive dialogues and storytelling opportunities, as well as collaborative efforts, best practice resources, as well as policy advocacy to enable viable solutions to our drinking water, lead in drinking water issue. And we welcome you to partner with us. So on your seats when you came in, you may have seen this guide that we put up. This is a quick answer to this issue could be is not only complicated, but it can be daunting. And so we want to make sure that our elected officials, our community officials, and everyone in the room understands there are steps we can take today to help build that bridge. And this guide is one of those starts. So at this time, I am very pleased to introduce our speakers. Darrell King is the Water Production Bureau Chief for the City of Evanston. His bio and all the speaker bios can be found in your one-pager for this event. Darrell has been hard at work on the lead and drinking water issue and will be sharing some of the approaches his utility in Evanston has been working to take to be able to educate, finance, and remediate lead exposure in their water service infrastructure. I'd also like to welcome Nancy Quirk, General Manager of the Green Bay Water Utility. And even though she is a Packers fan, we are more than delighted to have you with us today to share your experience and knowledge in tackling lead in the drinking water issue, both in Green Bay and also during your time working in Madison, Wisconsin. Welcome. And last but certainly not least, Chris Meister is the Executive Director of the Illinois Finance Authority. Chris's work on improving and leveraging our state revolving fund, as well as sitting on the Environmental Financial Advisory Board of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, helps provide us with an expert who will share the latest information about funding and financing regarding this issue. So here's how this is going to go. Each of our speakers is going to come and be able to present one at a time, and then we're going to launch right into a moderated panel discussion, and I promise this way we will leave that much more time for questions at the end from all of you, because we want to make sure this is interactive and you get a chance to talk with our experts in asking your questions. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Darrell first. Or you could do that.
Okay. Good afternoon. All right. So I'm going to briefly summarize the City of Evanston's lead reduction initiative. And these are in no particular order. So number one, water service information map. So part of the Public Act 0990922 that went into law, that became a law last year, utilities were required to compile a lead service line inventory and submit that to IEPA. We complied with that mandate, and we decided to take it a step further by creating a map on the city's website where a property owner or the general public can go put in an Evanston address, and it'll yield information about the water service type and size and information such as that. So that's our water service information map. Number two, our voluntary lead service line replacement program. This is something that's in our city code. and it's a cost-sharing opportunity between the property owner as well as with the city. And the way it works, the property owner can identify through our map even that, hey, I have lead, I want to get rid of it. And at the property owner's expense, same size, they can change out that service on the private side, and the city will in turn, at the city's expense, replace the service on the city side and take care of the restorations as well. So that's a cost-sharing opportunity that we've been doing maybe since about 2016. Number 3, the lead service replacement loan program. That's also in our city code, and that's an opportunity. It works in conjunction with our annual water main improvement program. During that process, we do replace services on the city side. So what it does is it gives a property owner an opportunity to apply for a loan up to $4,800 payable back over a 4-year period, $100 per month. Our water bills come out every 2 months, so there will be an additional $200 charge on the utility bill for that property owner. And so this is something, it's a 4-year process, and this program is funded from our Water Enterprise Fund. Number 4, our point of use filter distribution program. That's another program that is in conjunction with our water main improvement program, where property owners can request a point of use filter pitcher if there's going to be, if it's a complete replacement or even if there's a partial replacement, and we provide those pitchers and 2 replacement filters at no charge to the property owner or the resident. And this past year, we distributed, I believe, about 28 of them, 28 pitchers as well as the replacement filters. Number 5, our post-construction lead testing program. Again, property owners, residents can request lead testing post-construction at no charge to the resident or the property owner. And this year, we sent out about 118 notices to the community, telling them about the lead reduction initiative, inviting them out to a community meeting. And so far, during our season, our construction season, we've had 26 requests for post-construction lead testing, and we've gotten results back so far on 12 of those, of the results for that program. And all of the results are under the action level, the current action level of 15 parts per billion. Number 6, our annual water main improvement program. Every year, our goal is to replace 1% of our water mains throughout town. Part of that, again, I mentioned earlier, we do replace services. As part of that, it's not a complete service replacement at this time, it's a partial. But what we've taken is recommendations from the American Water Works Association, and if there is a partial, we do insert a 18 to 24-inch dielectric fitting, polyethylene tubing, CTS 1-inch tubing between the dissimilar metals to break up galvanic corrosion. So that's something unique that we do with that program. Number 7 is a pilot. We haven't done it yet. It's something that we're looking to do in 2019 pending award of funds. Our private lead service line replacements using CDBG grant funds. So if that's awarded, we'll go into low and moderate income areas where there are partial lead services from previous water main improvements, even where there are no, where the dielectric fitting is not present. And, we expect to, help in terms of affordability, we would take care of that. We'd hire a contractor to do the work, remove additional lead, as well as just get lesson learns on the process in terms of working on the private side. Number 8, drinking fountain and community center testing program. Beginning last year, we tested 60 outside drinking fountains throughout Evanston, and starting this year, we've tested 4 of our community centers. So those have just been great programs just to get a feel for, any lead levels or lead levels in those areas there. During those testing programs, we followed the IDPH guidance, where there's a a 30-second flush, and then just the initial with no flushing. So that was the difference with the post-construction lead testing. We actually did a first draw sample, a 3-minute flush, and then a 5-minute flush. So there was some differences in that. And finally, our communication plan. We have a pretty robust communication plan. There's about 11 communications that we send out to the public. Part of the Public Act, 14-day notice was required for work in areas that, was suspected to have lead services. So that's one, inviting folks out to community meetings, giving the post-construction lead testing, 48-hour notices, post-construction flushing notices. So it's definitely something pretty robust, and we work pretty hard to get the word out.
Thank you. Thank you, Daryl. We're going to move right into Nancy. Nancy, welcome.
Thank you. Okay, 3.5 years and 10 minutes, here we go. Let's see. We have, I'm going to go through what we've been doing to try to come into compliance. In 1991, when the lead and copper rule was first put out by EPA, through 2011, the Green Bay Water Utility had never had to add orthophosphates. We were compliant. In 2012, we exceeded, and we did not want to put orthophosphates in because we have dead zones at our Fox River and didn't want the wastewater utility to have to spend additional money. So we were looking at alternative ways to get it back into compliance. When Flint, Michigan happened, my commission said to me, Nancy, give me a plan of removing every single lead service in the city and how you're going to do it. So what we did is did a comprehensive plan where we wanted to continually do research on our water quality. We wanted to do yearly unidirectional flushing. When we did our testing on our lead, we found high particulates. So we were getting a lot of particulates getting into our service lines, and we thought if we could clean our mains out, we can get that particulate down and go and see what we have for a dissolved lead. Aggressive removal of lead services. We wanted to do concentrated public education, and we wanted to build commitment to community trust through transparency. Our unidirectional flushing program, we've done 2 rounds of complete distribution system unidirectional flushing. And for those that know what unidirectional flushing is, right, most of you in the water industry know to valve off mains so you can get higher velocities greater than 5 feet per second. We had communication. We worked with the fire suppression systems. We did postcards to residents. We had the areas on our website and Facebook pages. We did signing and media releases. This year, because of some of the research that we're doing, we found our corrosion to be microbiologically induced, and we knew that we needed to clean up our raw water lines and our transmission lines also. So this winter, in January and February, we flushed our 54-inch and 42-inch raw water lines that go from the lake to our filter plant. They're about 15 miles long. Then we flushed our finished water transmission lines, our 2 36-inch lines that go into the city. It's about 6 miles into the first station and 11 miles into our main pressure zone. Research strongly replaces, as Daryl pointed out, that a full lead service line removal is the only correct way. Utilities in Wisconsin own part of the water service. We only own from the water main out in the street to the curb stop in the terrace, and then the property owners in our city owns from the property or from the curb stop in the terrace into the home. So we had to develop 2 programs, one for the public side, our side, and one for the privately owned services. In December of '90, we had 4,466 utility-owned services. We had a pretty robust GIS system that we had good records on that. We did not know our private side. We had never really researched that. They didn't have to do permits to us, and the city didn't have good records. In December of 15, when Flint, Michigan hit, we were sitting at about 1,900 utility-owned services, and at that time we knew of 60. Our meter service guys had started going out there and looking at the materials and putting them in our GIS system, so we had data on some of them. We've had an aggressive removal since then. We had 1,783 in 16. Our total customer base was 35,870. And our goal is to remove all of our lead services by December 31st of 2020. We have continuous media coverage as the lines were replaced. When we started our public side, we wanted to check our safety. We brought a safety person out and made sure that when they were cutting the lead and things like that, they weren't getting exposed to lead as they were replacing it. We worked with our city on patches and permits and construction coordination. We gave them GIS maps of where all our lead services were and say, if you can plan any of these streets for replacement that have a lot of lead services in, it's going to save everybody some money. And we asked them to help with that. We also got our customer service guys involved because every service that we replace, we send our customer service guys out. They take the meter out, they put a pump on there with a hose, and they make sure that after the service is replaced, they flush out all that particulate, any of the stuff that comes off the pipes, we get it out of there. So we had to get resources, staff, budget, and a rate increase. The private side, as I said, was a little bit more challenging because we can't pay for it. The Public Service Commission won't let us pay for it, or they didn't let us pay for it. We've progressed a little bit there, but the city passed a resolution to eliminate plumbing fees. So when we did a private lead service replacement, they didn't have the fees going to inspection there. And then we needed to fine them. We had 167 services known at the time when we got to the 2016 plan. So we had to determine where our lead was, and we talked about that. You've enacted a rule in Illinois. We have not got a rule in Wisconsin, but we knew that if we wanted to develop a plan, we had to find them. We had to know where they were. So we had 588 homes that we knew were unknown, where we know we had a lead service. And so we went into every one of those homes and checked. And then we knew that there was 2,200 other properties where we didn't have lead, but we didn't know what the private side was. So we had to find out what those were. We did send out surveys and ask people to send them back. I'm just going to say real quick. We found 100 people had sent surveys back that said they had lead. And something led us to, there was some inconsistency where we went out and actually checked one of the homes, and it ended up being copper. So we said, okay, let's go back out. And we sent people into every one of those homes that said they had lead, and only like 5 of them did. So we said, okay, that's enough. We're going to do our own. We're going out there by ourselves. So we wanted to work with the Public on Funding Assistance Ordinance and Trust. Now, this is a part that might be different from the state of Illinois, but our common council stepped up to the plate and they said, we want to help the private citizens get their lead out. So they pledged $300,000. It was actually a refund that we had gotten from the Lambeau tax fund that the city had for development, and they gave us $300,000 for the program. And then our DNR local gave our Safe Drinking Water Loan Funds grant money, our principal forgiveness money, for private property. The one thing was that it was only for residential properties. So that's where the city funds came in. We could go into the commercial properties and get those done too. Now the state of Wisconsin passed legislation earlier this year that we can use ratepayer money to fund half of it. So Kenosha was the first one that went in, and they got approval from the Public Service Commission. Manitowoc has an application in now, and we're working on ours right now too. So you have to get approval from the Public Service Commission in order to include it in your rates. So public education, we had marketing, consultants, website. I just did a slide. It was like $65,000 we spent on marketing consultants during that first 2 years. We do have a site with our web. All of our lead services are shown, and we have a pretty robust page under our lead services and how you can do it. We have a video of how to do. We've got media, press releases, op-eds. We had consumer confidence report, lead brochure. We partnered with the Brown County Health Association. Again, we checked with them. Our kids who had been tested for lead, none of them, there was like 17 in the first year that we checked. None of them had a lead service. They were all from lead paint. But we wanted to partner with them to get the message out that paint and water both have to be dealt with, that we need to work together on this. We had public meetings. We had 3 public meetings. At one of our largest ones, only 1 person showed up. So our community was not that upset about this, I don't think. Research, we currently have monitoring stations in downtown office. We have a pilot test being set up in a filter plant for coagulants, where we've got our 2nd round of distribution system. We'll go again next year in our downtown area. We're going to continue to do our round of transmission mains every year in the real early winters, because that's when our flows are the lowest and we can take one of those lines out of service. Lead service replacements, we are at 725 at the end of September. Our private, we had found a total of 224, and we have about 30 left to replace with the funding. Our rate increase went in October 1st, 2018. And one other thing, yesterday we got our last lead samples from our 2nd round of sampling. We have to do 100 samples every year. Twice a year, and we were compliant. We only had 4 that were above 15 parts per billion of the 10 that are allowed, and we're heading in the right direction, so thank you.
Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Danielle.
Of course.
So thanks, everybody, for coming out. I'm really happy to share the stage with Daryl and Nancy, who are public water practitioners. I'm Chris Meister. I'm Executive Director of the Illinois Finance Authority. And so, of course, I think probably these discussions start about lead, and they very quickly move to how to pay for it. So we're fortunate here in Illinois that I think that we have 3 tools, 2 of which are potential tools, and 1 is a tool that local governments, the states, and the feds have coordinated on to really make a lot of progress on over the last 5 years, and I think that there's even more potential for that. So, but I do want to remind everybody of sort of the central problem, the practical problem of this lead issue. And I think Daryl and Nancy really touched on it, but it is really worth keeping foremost in everybody's mind. And I think it's not even a last mile problem. It's a last few hundred feet problem, because oftentimes, and I think both Daryl and Nancy touched on this, is that the existing water utility, the existing local government, their jurisdiction basically stops at the private property line. And then from our perspective at the Finance Authority, we deal with institutional borrowers. Nancy and Daryl are dealing with utility level operations and service. And all of a sudden, once that line crosses, you are now in the land of consumer lending, consumer protection, dealing with protections that consumers and private homeowners have with respect to contractors and other professionals that are coming into homes and onto private property. And I think that it's worth remembering that line. Now, I'll set the stage. The majority of what the Finance Authority does is that we deal with capital markets and large institutional borrowers. But again, we do have 3 pretty great tools. One, which I think has been proven, and that at least one Illinois community we have had some progress. So the first is the state revolving fund. And for those of you that don't know what this is, it's really a pretty extraordinarily successful federal, state, local financing program. Illinois, it is a AAA rated credit. We have done 3 issues between 13 and 17. The Finance Authority has been cooperating fully with the director and his team at IEPA and with past directors. And this has been a program that has been successfully expanded by two governors. So it's really a successful story, one that when we read the papers in Illinois, successful financial stewardship. It's a story that that is connected with Illinois far too few. But if you don't believe me, I actually have the official statement. This is available on the MSRB's Emma website for free. So what this is that at its end is that water and sewer are, for credit purposes, are essential purposes. These are typically among the last bills that people stop paying. And unlike most other utilities, people don't last very long without clean, drinkable water. So, so what the federal government did some years ago was that it started making grants to state EPAs or their equivalents to loan out at lower interest rates to local governments to bring their systems up to federal standards. And the entire program is really counterintuitive. It's an 80-20 match, but to use it most effectively, the steward of the program needs to borrow or leverage against the pledged loans, both sewer loans and drinking water loans. Now, this is a counterintuitive concept on the public side that I think Senator Staines and Alderman Villegas will recognize. Borrow more, and if you don't borrow more, this is you're actually being a poor steward of public funds. And I think that this is borne out nationally. Of the 51 qualifying states and commonwealths, only 28 use this program, and all of them can really use it more effectively. So, importantly, here in Illinois, IEPA has got at least one pilot program going on with replacing lines in the city of Galesburg, downstate, and I think that there is more room for growth. To give you an idea of the success of the Illinois program, between 13 and 17, we went from $200 million being borrowed to $1.1 billion, and there is an exponential expansion of available funds for local governments. Importantly, here in Chicago, the city of Chicago, over about this 5-6 year period, went from zero participation in the state revolving loan program to frankly about 12+% of the pledged loans. So there are two other programs. So number one, we have the state revolving fund, and it's expanding, it's being improved, and it's being made available. There are two other funds, or there are two other financing programs. The second is a federal program, the Water Infrastructure and Innovation Act, WIFIA. It was improved upon with some bipartisan federal legislation that was signed on October the 23rd. And this is a way to further expand the capability of the state revolving funds by basically allowing those funds to borrow at the federal funds rate, which is generally an additional saving over AAA rates of up to 30 basis points. So, and for the first 5 years of the loan, you do not have to repay principal and interest. And we think that this is an important tool. We have not yet, it's a fairly new program, and there are some bureaucratic hurdles. So we look forward with working with folks to get the first WIFIA loan here in Illinois. The final is property assessed clean energy bonds, or financing, which is a surcharge on your property tax bill. And in Illinois, after a pregnancy of about 9 years, it was signed into law in 2017, and then it was improved upon in 2018. And it does have a water efficiency element to it. We believe, and we're working very hard, the City of Chicago, through its Finance Committee, just passed a ordinance yesterday involving the Finance Authority and helping the city finance these PACE borrowings. But we do think that there is an opportunity, especially given the private property element of this piece, that PACE in the future can become an important financing tool. The Illinois program is limited to commercial and industrial properties. Going back to how I started this conversation, we thought that it was important to prove out the concept with commercial and industrial landowners who tend to be more sophisticated than private homeowners before this program went into the residential market. So with that, thanks.
Thank you, Chris. How about another round of applause for our speakers today? Nice work. Do you want to test those and see if they're on real quick?
Test?
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. So a lot of really great discussions, a lot of juice in there. I'm kind of trying to still figure out, okay, what's the PACE thing, Chris? And then, okay, Nancy, how did you do this with your DNR and funding and all of that? So I do have a couple questions that I want to ask, but please do be primed for your questions because we're going to start opening it up shortly to make sure that questions that you have for the speakers are being asked as well. So, Daryl, did you mention how many lead service lines Evanston potentially has?
Yeah, I did not. We have just under 15,000 lead service lines throughout Evanston, and we know that on the public side, there are about 8,100 or 56% of that total are still lead that are the city's responsibility, and about 92% are still lead on the private side.
Okay. So that's a lot to attend to. I'm curious if the city is starting to explore, instead of, even with the latest technology and doing partial service line removal, or replacement, excuse me, is the city looking at how they might be able to truly help fund full lead service line replacement? Certainly given some of the inklings that Illinois Department of Public Health has been saying with regards to issues on partial lead service line replacement.
We're pretty much waiting on direction, whether by way of the lead and copper rule or maybe another public act even that comes out. Currently, we finance all of our service line replacements on the city's own portion via the water fund. We like to, for water main improvements and service line replacements, we try not to bond or borrow money for that. We like to do it cash. I would imagine if there was a mandate of some sort, or we just decided to say, hey, we're going to do full replacements, what may end up doing, we'd like to keep it a cash project. So one option would be maybe to reduce the mileage and the amount of water maintenance services that we currently do now, maybe step it back so that we can still use cash from our water fund.
Got it. Thank you. Nancy, can you speak a little bit more to how you tackled the daycare and schools issue with lead and service lines?
Sure. When we first started exploring the program for Green Bay, we did do a query on all of our in-home daycares, and we did go and replace those first. There was probably under 10, but we did go out there and get those done first. And then schools, well, John Donahue and I are both on the Water Utility Council for American Water Works Association dealing with regulatory, and we were at a meeting a couple of years ago where the EPA talked about the Center for Disease Control guidance for schools and daycares, and when we got back from that meeting, I called our school district in, and we gave them this manual. It was like this thick, and we said, you know, why don't you start looking through this, look at your reservoirs, look at your drinking fountains, start looking at your fixtures, and then, we started helping them to test. And they did test every single building and found that they were in compliance. But they had proactively have been replacing those old fixtures and getting the lead out of the schools too, so.
Thank you. So both of you mentioned the importance of public transparency and getting education out there to citizens. If you had tips for folks here in the audience, there's a lot of them that either run or certainly work for a water utility on what are some of the key important messagings or timings for making sure that you're out in front of this and helping, in some cases, rebuild public trust with your customers?
That's kind of a tough one. We did hire a communication director in 2017. I was using marketing firms, as I said, for a while because we understand how important it is to communicate with our public. So social media posts of what we're doing. We had press releases. We did have the public meetings, trying to be out there and open. We also sent letters directly to the homes we knew that had a lead service and said, please, we're going to be replacing this, but in the meantime, make sure you run your water, make sure you're, gave them tips on what to do to reduce their lead levels, and trying to be, I give updates to our Common Council every month on our lead service replacement program and how we're doing, so that they know that we're proactively going forward, and we have information on our website. How about you?
I think, one of the big things is just being transparent and honest. I think there was a time in the water industry where, you work 30, 40 years, stay out of the news, and you retire.
Laughs of recognition. Laughs of recognition, okay.
And, but those days are changing now. So I think just communicating, making sure you have a lot of information on your website, inviting folks out to community meetings so that you can, definitely just kind of face-to-face explain what's going on. If there's work going on in areas where there's lead, make sure you're giving out communications. And if folks call in, have questions, call them back. Those types of things. Just being just transparent and being open to interacting with the public about lead and just about water quality issues in general, or your utility bill. Just being more open with the public.
Thank you. Chris, you represent in some ways kind of the federal ears to this right now, given your role at EFAB with US EPA. You spoke eloquently about the state revolving fund and WIFIA, so the state level certainly funded and budgeted for at the federal level, but then WIFIA is the federal program to help, supplement that on a larger scale. I'd be interested, these are programs that are low interest loan programs for communities to utilize. On the back end of that, there is the need for where is the revenue going to come from to pay back those loans. And so in that conversation at the federal level, is there an acknowledgement of how at the federal level we might be able to assist on that revenue generation side of it, as well as the loan opportunities?
Well, on the loan opportunities, and again, the WIFIA program is fairly new, and there have been some bureaucratic hurdles, but in the 2018 notice of funding availability, the first priority was actually providing for clean and safe drinking water, including reducing exposure to lead in the nation's drinking water systems. So that was a priority of the 2018 funding round. EFAB, in October of 17, we did a fairly lengthy survey of the issue, and then additional resources, what was going on in other jurisdictions. It actually looks like this, and I'll give you a PDF so that you can put on the website. It's fairly recent, and it's a national survey. So you ask a very interesting question, because I think the direction that the federal government appears to be moving in is by making financing tools more accessible and widespread. They are less inclined, and this has been a message that I've been hearing for a number of years now, they've been less inclined to go in the direction of grants. The development of this state revolving fund over the past 2 or 3 decades, I think, is one successful illustration. The funding for state revolving fund actually comes from federal grants that go to the states on an 80-20 match. It is that equity contribution that allows the reduced interest rates and the less expensive financing. Similarly, WIFIA is based on the expectation that since we're talking about essential public services run by sophisticated, competent water professionals, that the default rates on these sorts of projects are very, very low. And as a result, the cost to the Treasury is something, I mean, frankly, I always find it hard to believe the multiples that the WIFIA program projects, but it's something like 1,000 to 1. And it does not intuitively make a lot of sense to me, but then the state revolving fund does not usually make a lot of sense to people when you explain it to them the first or sometimes even the 5th time. So, but I think that the direction is going to be cheaper financing, not grants. And it's something that we're all going to have to become accustomed to.
Got it. Thank you very much. I do have more questions, but I want to start opening it up for you in the audience to be able to ask your questions. And I believe, John, did I just see your hand? If you'll wait for the mic. We have a mic coming around. I'm going to switch to this other mic.
Never been accused of not being heard. So Chris, you're talking about WIFIA, and I've been involved in the development of the WIFIA program with AWWA, and the default rate, you're absolutely right about default rates for communities. Communities are very good risk. There's less than 1% default on SRF money across the country, and usually when those are defaulted, within a year or two, once the utility gets their rates reestablished to satisfy those loans are satisfied. So that's why the leveraging at the Treasury level for WIFIA dollars is so high. But it's not 1,000 to 1. We projected it to be somewhere between 90 and 95 to 1.
Yeah.
And I think EPA.
It's a large number.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think EPA is even being conservative about their estimates now and just using probably 65 or 70 to 1 for that. And my question for Nancy and Daryl, because I don't think you really touched on it much in your presentation due to time, but how do you deal with customers in your system who just can't afford, that need to do it, need to replace their service line, and no matter how cheap you make it, can't afford to do it?
Okay, I'll just start. Because of the funding that we have and the number of private services that we had, we are able to fully fund 100% of the replacement at this time. But there are still 20, maybe about 15 properties of those ones left on our private side that won't let us replace it. We have an ordinance in place that will allow us to fine them. We haven't gone down that road yet, but in order to get them out, I mean, they're 100% funded. The only thing that we asked, because of the safe drinking water loan money that we had for the residents, if we contracted out, if we let out a bid as a city, as a utility, we would have had to do Davis-Bacon laws and all that other stuff. But we set up these agreements where the property owner contracts with the contractor. We go with the contractor and say we'll pay them directly. We have like a 3-way agreement that we do that allows us to bypass the Davis-Bacon thing, so we can get more cost-effective ways to get that replaced. And we're running about 4,700 a service as what the private side is right now. But right now, we are doing 100%. And we figure sometime early next year, if we start finding more, we're finding like maybe one a month right now. Our guys are going out and trying to find additional services. But this Public Service Commission law that went through, we are looking at funding, we're trying to set up special assessments for the other 50%. We'll pay 50% and they'll pay the other 50%. And we're looking at like maybe special assessments. We also looked at community development block grants too for low income, but just giving them an option to get money.
Again, we're looking to utilize for the first time the CDBG grant funds in the low and moderate income areas. We have no idea, any funding levels at this time. We did apply for them, but that's definitely one resource that we'd like to make available to low income residents or property owners that live in Evanston, as well as our community development department. They have programs available where they can either provide certain levels of grant or loans. And I know some of the loans, one of the programs that they have, the loan is paid back when the house sells. So, in many cases, someone may live in the house for 40 or 50 years. So those are opportunities too in other departments where we can refer folks to that department, and they have programs in place to assist.
So how many of you in the audience are looking at this as far as you have lead service lines in your community and you're trying to figure out what is the mix and packaging of funding to be able to tackle this issue? No one? You're all being shy. Yes? Yeah, it's a complicated issue, right? Do we have other questions? Oh, all the way in the back in the corner.
Hi, Maria Pesqueda with the Healthy Communities Foundation. Just a question of clarification, for clarification. Earlier I heard that there were some tests that came out that I guess originally folks thought that there was lead and it turned out to be copper. Was that based on home tests that were done? And if so, are there additional resources provided or tests given to residents to be able to test their water for lead?
Okay, that was under, I think, my presentation, and we sent with these letters where we wanted to find out, we sent them a brochure, and we said, this is what a copper pipe looks like, this is what a steel pipe, or galvanized steel pipe looks like, and this is what lead is, and we said, if you get a magnet, it will be, lead, I think, but people just didn't know how to identify it. We had a video on our website that showed how to identify the lead, and I don't know why they didn't recognize it. Maybe they tried a magnet and it stuck, so they said it was lead.
Okay. Did you provide any other kind of lead testing samples, home tests?
I mean, as far as water samples?
Yes.
Well, we tested we did do lead samples for customers if they wanted us to do one. But, knowing that we had a lead service, there isn't, I think there's things being developed right now to do some of that testing. I don't think it's widespread yet. I haven't seen it and heard of anything yet that's going to be doing that. I mean, we bought a small little camera that can go inside of a service, and it will take a picture of it all the way down, and we can see if it's lead or copper. We started doing some of that, but that's time intensive and will take a while too. But we do have that available to us now.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Right up here, third row.
All right, so can you speak more to how you did your...
Can you introduce yourself real quick? Sorry.
Rod Wharton from Lake County Public Works. How did you do your private side surveys? How did you come to your sense that X number of private service lines have lead?
So we've done a couple things. We have history in terms of installation dates. So, the old cards and what's in our GIS, and we just kind of compared the two together to verify what was in the street and what was in the house based off of old historical tap cards, as well as what's in our current GIS. In addition to that, we also are in the process of a water meter replacement program, phase 1. We have 2 phases. We just replaced just under 6,000 water meters, and part of the task for the installers was to go inside and identify lead service material coming into the property. So that was another way where we also was able to verify. And in addition to that, whenever our meter technician folks go to a property or there's a 311 request for service and we have an opportunity to go inside the house, that's another opportunity that we take to just put an eye on the service material and see what's down there.
And I'll just add, when we were trying to find the service types, we did do 3 mailings of postcards saying, this is how you identify, or can we please get in your house, can you call us? When that didn't work, we went out and started knocking on doors. We specifically targeted those homes that we thought might have a lead service that were built before 1945, is what we determined in our city to be where lead was stopped at that. And then we did mailings again. We haven't seen your service. Can you please let us in? And everything we did, we got a little bit more. And we were down to like 60 or 70 that we couldn't get in. And we started doing meter replacements at those homes. We said, okay, we got to get in there. The police offered to start helping us get in there, but we didn't really want to take that tax. So we went to, okay, we're just going to change our meter out, and we make appointments, and then that's how we're getting in and finding them.
So that's clever, right? It's a lesson learned. We're going to change out your meter. By the way, we're going to check this out. I'm curious, and if you've got questions, please raise in your hands, but I'm curious if I could get maybe a cost comparison between in Green Bay versus what Evanston is seeing as far as the average cost of full lead service line replacement. Do you guys have those figures?
So in Evanston, we're looking at on the public side, we're looking at about $3,000 on the public side.
That's just the public.
That's just what the city of Evanston is experiencing, and we're looking at an estimated cost of $17 million just to replace the public side or the city-owned side services. And on the private side, we're looking more at $7,000 per
Full cost for per line,
per line.
for the full line,
Just on the
just in the private. So
just on the private side.
around 10?
Excuse
So
me?
if I'm doing my math right, is it around 10 then for a full
Oh,
lead
for
service line
both,
replacement?
Yeah, 9,000, 10,000, somewhere in that area.
Okay.
So the
And-
private side is 7?
So the private side, we're estimating to be 7. The public side, we're estimating just under 3,000. So about 10,000, as you said. And so we're looking at about 17 million public side and about 91, 92 million on the private side, based on the number of services that we know are still lead on both.
Got it.
And we had, we figured about $5,000 on the public side, considering the pavement patch and some of those things. We have, and as I said, it's $4,700 for our private side, so about 10,000 combined too.
Okay. Thank you. Questions? Oh, thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary Sue Barrett, President of the Metropolitan Planning Council. Thanks to this excellent panel and to this fascinating audience, both. Question for any of the panelists by way of advice. Here in metropolitan Chicago, we have 274 separate units of local government, all of which are water utilities, whether they deliver that publicly or privately. What advice would you have to our balkanized region, which has many, many challenges, about how this issue might be solved in a more efficient way through joint service sharing or joint financing and operational intergovernmental agreements?
Go ahead.
There was one idea that occurred to me on this sort of last few hundred feet that we've been talking about is that in the wake of federal stimulus, there was grant funding that went out to places like the Chicago Bungalow Association and Elevate Energy, and they were engaged in basically inside the door construction work on the energy side. I think that those organizations are robust and they still exist and they have local reputation and they have local, basically, client bases. So I think that the existing infrastructure for the last few hundred feet can be used through the infrastructure that grew in as a result of the federal infrastructure investment. I think that the broader question then becomes is maximizing the use of things like the state revolving fund. There are still a number of communities that don't borrow through that, through whatever. The point about WIFIA, I think ultimately WIFIA will take its place along with the state revolving fund as another lower cost financing tool to get at these key infrastructure issues. And then the Finance Authority is working on standard documents for property assessed clean energy at the commercial and industrial level, and hopefully that will be a template ultimately for residential.
I think it's a good point that there's intermediaries. I'm just curious, in Green Bay, Madison, or Evanston's case, did you get inquiries from your neighbors about hopping on board and
I would just say
getting the
that
scale?
not so much on the lead service side. We are currently in a collaboration study with our neighboring utilities to do business services. We started doing billing of one of our local suburbs, De Pere. We do billing for Ashwaubenon. We do billing for Wrightstown. We hired a national consultant to help us figure out how we can look at these so that it benefits both of our customers and trying to reduce the cost of our services. EPA at the big level out in Washington, D.C. is certainly encouraging that utilities do work together, that we share and try to reduce the cost, because affordability is becoming a huge, huge issue in the United States for water and wastewater services, because we need it so much. And wherever we can try to, maybe we can look at lead services. I think in our case, the utilities around us kind of didn't know where they were yet. They didn't know the scope of what they had to deal with. The larger utilities had the data. And so I think that as we go along, we are looking at operations, main breaks, service repairs, and see if we can help and collaborate with each other. So.
I think it comes down to a utility's business processes and what their goals and what their visions are in terms of lead service replacements, how they want to pay for it. I think one utility compared to another utility, they're not in the same place, I think, which can make it difficult for if you're painting fire hydrants or if you're purchasing vehicles and you come together as a group or what have you, do it that way, it's more simple. But I think with this being such a complicated issue, Evanston has not partnered with any of our neighbors in terms of how we're going to attack and pay for lead service replacements. I think our ideal right now is to pay for it with cash. SRF funds are definitely an option. We prefer to not borrow for that type of work. It's gonna make rates more affordable, more unaffordable, and then the whole public-private fund use could be an issue too. People might sue over stuff like that. So I think it's going to require a lot of guidance from legislators and regulators to kind of give us additional steps on this is what's required, and here are some things, that are available.
I just like to add on to that, just as he was talking, it reminded me too that, right now, the federal government is struggling with getting the new lead and copper rules out. I mean, we were told at one point that they were going to get a draft out in February of 2019. Now that's being pushed out a little bit more. But as, lacking federal guidance, these lead service programs that are going on are almost all voluntary. We're saying, okay, this is what our community wants to do. They're not being mandated, I'm Italian, I can just go back up in the hands. When, the communities themselves are kind of making those decisions. And when the federal government, if they would come forward and say, you will replace lead services as you replace water mains, or you will replace lead services over 30 years, you might see some more cooperation, because then utilities are going to have to step forward and start dealing with it. I think a lot of these programs that we have going right now are just people who understand that their communities want them to get the lead out.
And just to add to that, lead, all the services going, let's just say they're all going. We talked about solder and inside plumbing and fixtures and things of that nature. But even lead-free, it doesn't really mean lead-free. You have, the NSF 372 deals with the lead content to 0.25%. And then you have NSF 61 that deals with the metal, the amount that can leach. It has to be less than 5 parts per billion. So you can still have a lead-free water meter or a lead-free valve, and it can pass the content standard 372, but it could fail NSF 61 in terms of how much lead still leaches. It could exceed the 5 parts per billion level. So that's an issue too.
How many of you in the audience are relating to this right now? Right? Okay, so clear direction, duly noted. I do want to, if you have a question, please do raise your hand so I can make sure that the mic walker is getting over to you. But Chris, I wanted to ask you, it's in your bio that's printed, but you grew up in Flint, Michigan. And I just, with with all due seriousness, the tragedy that happened in Flint, Michigan, and speaking to your experience growing up there, and now the work that you do today, and if you could give us some of your thoughts on that, please.
Well, thanks. We moved from Flint to Oak Park in '81. I think that the lesson of Flint, especially for the people in this room, it's about a failure of governance at both the local and the state level. And I think a failure of governance can happen at any point and at any time, and I think that Mary Sue pointed out the large number of local governments that we have, and in Illinois it is tied intimately with the property tax, and our economy is going through a rather massive change where communities that built themselves on retail sales and use tax may in the coming years have challenges. And I think it becomes incumbent upon policymakers to make sure that the tools of self-government are not too complex, because you're going to have these problems when the tools are too complicated for the people running the governments to use. Ultimately, the story of Flint was one of decades-long disinvestment, but there are communities in Illinois and Wisconsin and Indiana that have seen the same story. And so I come back to, there was a decision made by a state-appointed financial manager to stop buying a certain type of chemical that was the direct and proximate cause of that problem, as I understand it. But I think it's a lesson to everybody in public service that that governance is something that needs to be robust.
So I'm hearing as part of this discussion is clear direction and less is more with regards to complication of how we roll out the programs.
Yes.
Great. Nancy, you want to add?
I just wanted to add, and what we heard in the water industry too from Flint was that the science and technology was overridden by policy and decision makers. So we want to make sure that we have sound science and technology when we go forward, and that any policies, I mean, when Senator Coles in our state put forward the funding for the lead services, he called me and said, Nancy, is this going to work? You know, we want to work with our legislators, but let the water professionals too be a part of that discussion, because we've run I've been in the water industry for 31 years now, and I've seen a lot of things, and we want to take that science and put it into good practice.
So make sure your experts are at the table. How many of you agree with that? Great. We have a question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sure, no.
Go for it.
Colleen Smith, Illinois Environmental Council, certainly not an expert at the table, but at the table nonetheless. And something that Senator Staines referenced was the bill that we worked on last year. And a question that keeps coming up is who is ultimately responsible for getting this let out and who's going to be held accountable? Nancy, I heard you mention that Green Bay does have the opportunity or the tool to use fines for homeowners that won't let them on their property. And I understand the hesitancy to do that, since you could imagine that communities that'd be the most hesitant to let you on their property are those already disenfranchised. So what other tools, or how do we rectify that issue of what will happen when homeowners just won't let those who need and will be accountable for getting the let out on their property?
I'm going to share my experience. I started my water career at Madison Water Utility in Wisconsin, and I worked there 15 years. I was there when they rolled out the lead service replacement program. Madison was the first city in the United States to replace all of its lead services. And just as an FYI, as Daryl was saying, their 90th percentile right now is still at 3 parts per billion, so that there's some lead in the homes that's still getting there. But I think that in Madison, they had like a handful of property owners still wouldn't let them into the houses. I think that you can do water shutoffs, you can do other things to try to encourage that. I think at some point they might have had people just sign off and say, I agree that I'm not liable. Sometimes you just got to move on, if you can't really work with people. And we try to do meter service replacements because we do have the right to shut water off after we notice them properly. So that's a big impetus for them to get in, to let us in.
So maybe in thinking about legislation and regulation, that providing appropriate disclaimer and coverage for the utility that's doing best efforts to be able to go in and do the work, if there is not cooperation, what that processy is for making sure that the utility is covered under liability with regards to that. So we have time for one, maybe 2 more questions. Got one over here.
Hi, John Brophy with City Colleges of Chicago, and my question, it's really about just drawing on the lessons of Flint, and one of the researchers that came in was from Virginia Tech and not from Michigan State or University of Michigan or any one of the amazing educational institutions in Michigan, and what was later explained to be people didn't want to upset the governor, in state financed institutions. How, within Illinois, given that a lot of the smaller community, Galesburg, places like that have a lot of these issues in addition to bigger cities like Chicago, how would you say we should go about engaging the different universities, whether it's like UW Green Bay or Northwestern or any of the community colleges around the state in terms of the citizen scientist portion of it, the data gathering, collection of information, whether it's water sampling or surveys of magnets and things like that. What do you see that role as being in terms of engaging the colleges in this effort?
I think it's just in terms of just involvement. If there are I get requests a lot from students from various colleges that, want to do research, some type of water quality research, not necessarily lead, but just various things for work that they're doing toward their degrees. So I think just having that open communication or an open invitation, an open door policy, somewhat with our educational institutions, knowing who, which department deals with that kind of stuff, and reaching out to them, interns, working with departments to have interns come into the treatment plan or whatever that utility is, and to work with them as well. So I think it's a number of different strategies that a utility can take to reach out to the academic arena, to involve them in whether it's lead or disinfection byproducts or whatever it is, and involve them, present educational opportunities to them.
I just say, I think you make an excellent point of trying to do that. I mean, locally, maybe I haven't utilized them so much, but I know that nationally at the AWWA, American Water Works Association, we have technical advisory groups, and we have a subgroup on lead and copper rule, and we have institutions doing research all over. We have a Water Research Foundation that has multiple projects right now going on lead and copper and galvanized services and all that technology, and so they are engaging with institutions at that point. But I think locally, maybe I could take a hint from you and go out there and see what maybe they can help me with. So.
Great. Thank you for your time. So we are at time. Apologize if you have questions. Hopefully we can do an email, or you can come up and talk with folks afterwards. But I do want to give one moment. If any of you have any final remarks that you would like to share, you're welcome to do that. Or if you've said your piece, that's good too.
I just think none of us have to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from each other. That's what we've done in Evanston. We've pulled lessons learned, strategies from a lot of different utilities, from guidance, documents, and different things like that. So don't think that you have to make up or invent everything on your own. You can pull from other folks.
And I guess I'd just like to add that, like, this table is multidisciplinary. We have water utilities plus finance. We had to reach out to our finance people. We had to reach out to our health community. We had to reach out to other people and our legislators in our communities to help us to solve this problem. It was a joint effort to try to get to where we are today.
Great. Wonderful. So we're not done yet. I'm hearing the rumblings. That's fine. Collect yourselves. But I do want to, so you don't hear me talking my mug the whole time, I do want to turn over to my colleague and partner in crime on our water programs here, Vice President Josh Ellis here at the Metropolitan Planning Council, to bring it home for us.
Thanks, Danielle. So very quickly, I want to thank our three speakers today, our sponsor, Christopher Burke Engineering, Senator Staines, for kicking us off. The Metropolitan Planning Council does a lot of events, and I see some faces here that are at many of our events, and I see a lot of faces here who are here for the first time. We do events like this, lunchtime panels, getting deep into a discussion topic. We do evening events, which is a mix of a happy hour and other things. We do events with partners all the time. And so this is a good time of year because we're thinking about programming for next year. If there are relevant topics to work that you're doing anywhere in the metropolitan region or beyond, this is a good time to let myself or Danielle or Mary Sue or any of the other MPC colleagues know. I will say, for all the events that we do, it is very rare that we have members, current and former members of the Illinois General Assembly, multiple counties, a city alderman, folks from Rockford to Richton Park, the US EPA to local environmental justice groups, all in the same room at the same time talking about something. And I think that speaks to, one, the topic at hand and the pressing issue that this represents for everyone, as well as the role that MPC can play in bringing folks together who should be talking to each other but might not know each other about these issues. Chris, when he started off, made reference to what am I going to tell my kids years from now about our work on this. First, my kids are 3.5 and 1.5, so I have like an 8-year window to be involved in anything that I can then tell them to impress them, all right? So we've got a short period of time here to make some real progress. And what I would like to be able to tell them is that MPC and all of you rallied and against all odds of politics, change in mayors, change in governors, money, also money, more money, right? Public doubt, science. We figured out a way to, I'm not going to use the word galvanize because that means something specific to the water utility folks here, to catalyze, there you go.
That's also specific.
Damn. Rally everyone to work on this, right? And maybe for some folks they're thinking, we're doing this before we need to, right? Because we haven't hit a crisis point because we aren't Flint yet and we're not Galesburg, frankly, yet in most of our communities. But that means this is the time to do something before we get there. So I want to thank all of you for being here today. We will be working on legislative action with Senator Staines and hopefully many folks in the room to move forward here. We'll be working on local partnerships with the Mayor's Caucus. Edith is over here, and many of you. We will be working on figuring out a way to get the money. Chris brought a large bag with him today, so I don't know if he's giving that to one municipality here today to fund a lead program, but we will be figuring out a way to make the financing work and connect it to communities. You can give it to me, that's fine. So I want to thank you all for being here. This is going to take a long time. You all know that. You're in the trenches. So are we. We're happy to work with you. I want to thank you all for being here today and enjoy the rest of your day.